Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. As you can see, I've been having a ton of fun putting these acrylic artist inks through my airbrush. This stuff is an absolute joy to use. Stick around and I'll show you just how easy it is to get these cool effects. So, there's been a lot of buzz about these inks. Independent Characters Podcast, I'm looking at you. Well, I finally decided to give them a try. What makes these inks special is that they have a ton of pigment and they flow really well. In this video, I'm going to show how I put down some sweet base coats on these 40K bottles. I have two brands here, Liquitex Artist Ink and Daler Rowney FW ink. My local craft store actually carries both of these lines. One of the nice things about supplies marketed for the broader art community is that they are clearly labeled with which pigments they contain. Gaming-oriented paints from Games Workshop, Vallejo, and others don't tend to report what combination of pigments are in each bottle. On the other hand, fine art supplies typically do list pigments, and this is actually really useful information. These bottles are listed as being transparent, opaque, or semi-transparent. Most of them are in the transparent category, but some, especially those containing white pigment, PW6 titanium white, are opaque. See how handy those pigment labels are? Today, I'm most interested in that opaque white ink and in the colored transparent inks. So, for these color tests, I rounded up a bunch of bigger, unpainted models that I had around. This is where being a Craigslist hawk and a bit of a hoarder really pay off. If you're not yet blessed with an abundance of fancy models, you can always try out new paint schemes on toy soldiers or cars or dinosaurs for a fraction of the cost. Since I do have some unpainted Warhammer 40K models, I'm using them for these tests. They're iconic and cool looking. All the layers of paint that I'm putting on are quite thin, so I can always repaint these down the road. I can even strip them down to bare plastic and start over if I wanted to. For now, I'm just going to play around and have fun. There's no real cost if I make some mistakes or end up with some ugly models. So let's do some experimenting and see if we can learn a new technique. I primed the models with Vallejo Airbrush Primer. I started mostly with a black undercoat, although a few models were brown. The next step was to highlight some areas with white ink. I loaded up my airbrush and went to work. This is some really fun stuff. Often white paints are chalky and hard to use, but this ink is thin, flows great, and still gives pretty decent coverage. The basic strategy that I'm going to use here is to pre-shade these models with white ink over a dark primer coat, and then hit them with colored inks. Spraying translucent colored ink over white should give bright, striking colors. Spraying colored ink over black should give a darker tone. I'm going for an overall mottled effect with lots of dramatic color transitions that really pop. I'm hitting the models generally from above, but I'm not coating them evenly. The effect that I'm trying to get here are those sweet transitions from patches of light to patches of dark. Partially, this gives the impression of light reflecting off some spots but not others, and partially, it just looks cool. I'm still a novice with my airbrush. I can base coat, zenithal highlight, and fix a clog, but that's about it. What I mean to say is that absolutely anyone can use the techniques that I'm using in this video, and probably better than I can. Right now, I'm just tooling around and putting paint where I think it will look cool. No stress, just experimenting and seeing how things go. I'm trying to be a bit restrained with how hard I pull back on the trigger. I want the ink to dry almost as soon as it touches the model. If the flow from the airbrush is too high, liquid pools will form. Here on the Devilfish is probably where I made the worst error of this kind, and this is the sort of thing that I'm generally trying to avoid. You can see the ink as it dries on these panels on the Dark Eldar Raider. When the ink is wet, it is a brighter white than when it dries. I found that if you want a true white, you need to revisit the same spot 2 or even 3 times. For the Raider, I tried this pattern of having a bright spot on each armor panel. For the Devilfish, I tried a bit of a tiger pattern. For most of the rest, I just freestyled and tried to highlight some spots I thought might look cool. Not in any particular pattern, but still reasonably spread around the model. The way the ink sprays and dries gives pretty nice transitions. If you look closely, you can still see tiny flecks, but they really aren't bad, and it seems to me that the flecks are a bit less noticeable than if I had been spraying with a thicker acrylic paint. For the Dark Eldar Talos, I actually tried to make even smoother transitions by using an intermediate gray ink before loading up the white. I really don't think it was necessary though. Shooting the white ink over black makes a pretty nice continuum of gray all by itself. Actually, I think using the gray ink over the black before taking out the white ink makes the model overall less interesting, just because those transitions are a little less dramatic. Finally, for a few models, I highlighted up from a brown coat. I've been conditioned to fear the prospect of painting yellow over black, although now that I think about it, I would actually like to try yellow over black with this technique. Maybe next time. Okay, here's the pile of models which have been primed and highlighted with white. They actually look pretty spicy just as they are. I'll have to remember this if I ever want to make an urban camo scheme someday. Today is all about colors though. Let's pick some nice vibrant colors for these models. I went through and selected one colored ink for each of these models. For some of them, I had a particular look in mind, but for others, I just wanted to try out that color. Let's get to it. For the big Tyrannid, I used fluorescent blue. Blue-shelled Tyrannids have been on my mind for a while, so I definitely wanted to give this a try. I'm just going around, pulling back gently on the airbrush trigger, and trying to gently build up some color on those white areas. This ink is marked with a T for transparent or translucent, but I think the practical implications of that T label actually varies a lot depending on the pigment. Even some of these transparent or translucent inks give pretty good coverage over black, so I'm making an effort to hit the white areas with color more so than the black areas. I figure this will give a more dramatic transition from dark to light and from monochrome to color. On the Devilfish, I thought I'd see if I could do something a bit like a tiger's stripes. Of course, a tiger has nice distinct boundaries between its colors, and an airbrush gives smooth transitions, but all the same, let's see if I can get a fun stripey effect. I did my best to build stripes with white ink, then I came back over the top of the white with scarlet ink. After buying all those inks, I realized I was missing a true middle orange. Luckily, this scarlet I picked up has a definite orange tinge to it. This is one of those times when the pigments listed on the bottle are interesting. The label tells us the ink contains a red pigment, red 112, and a yellow pigment, yellow 11. Hence, we get an orange flavor. Next up is a piece of terrain from the Orc Kill Team box. This is one of the models I primed in brown and highlighted with white. I'm just so conditioned to painting yellow over brown. Anyway, since this is construction equipment, I hit it with the color Yellow Orange Azo. Back to those pigment labels, this ink has a single pigment, Yellow 83. And indeed, Yellow 83 is one of a class of molecules known as azo dyes. Someday I'll do a whole mini-series on pigments, but let's move on. I hit a marine with Vivid Lime Green. I'm scoping out possibilities for a Sons of Medusa kill team, and this might indeed have some promise. I hit a second marine with Bright Lemon Yellow, and I think it came out a little too bright for my tastes. Next up, a Gene Stealer with Process Magenta, a nice vibrant color, but I probably won't build a magenta swarm anytime soon. For this Tau Piranha, I used FW Dark Green. Not bad, not bad. I don't know if it's a Tau color, but the effect is pretty nice, and I'll probably find a use for it someday. For this Venom, I used Phthalocyanine Green. Now, this color is interesting because it looks a lot like that FW Dark Green I just used on the Piranha. If we look at the ingredients list, this is green 7, and the Piranha was green 36, both of which are compounds in the phthalocyanine family. Some of these models are coming out more fitting than others. I didn't really like this shade of green on the Tau Piranha, but it works great for the vibe of the Dark Eldar. It actually goes pretty well with the box art that Games Workshop has for Kabalite Warriors. Next up is the Dark Eldar Raider. The Raider is the model where I was most deliberate in putting down the white ink. A nice splash on each armor panel. I actually have a lot of Dark Eldar vehicles to paint, and I've been holding off because I just can't decide on a paint scheme. Maybe these inks are the answer. I think there's a good chance. I really like the way the white lights up each armor panel. I'm using Phthalocyanine Blue for the colored ink on this model. The bottle says that this is transparent or translucent, but it's a really overpowering color. And even though I was trying to be gentle, the whole Raider just looks dark blue now. The whole model is too much of a dark blue, and the color transitions are too subtle now to be appealing to my eye. This model is still a good learning experience though. As always, it's useful to know what pigments we're working with. Phthalo blue is a common enough pigment that I've actually heard about it before. It was even one of the colors on Bob Ross's palette. PBS spelled phthalo wrong, but still. Learning how to use phthalo blue just seems like a better life skill than learning how to use Griffin blue or Calgar blue or Thunderhawk blue. The game companies change their formulas and change their names pretty frequently, so I'm glad to have a bottle of phthalo blue around. For the Adepta Sororitas Immolator, I decided to try a shade of purple. This is Deep Violet, a color that I was very excited about. In the Army Painter Warpainter line, one of the colors I really wanted to love is Orc Blood, but the coverage I get with that bottle is really disappointing. So I'm definitely still in the market for a great shade of reddish purple, and this here might be just the thing. This Deep Violet is labeled as a semi-transparent shade, so I tried to be a bit cautious to preserve the dark areas. The result isn't too bad. I think that this could be a churchy shade of purple for some Sisters of Battle. On to painting this old rhino with processed cyan. So the Immolator that I just painted was the first semi-transparent ink that I used so far, and this blue is the first opaque shade. This stuff goes on pretty much like thin paint. As you can see, the white areas and the black areas all turn into the same shade of light blue. It's a nice color, but this ink isn't giving the effect that I'm looking for here. For the Land Raider, I used this emerald green, sort of wondering if I could get a cool salamander scheme going. This is another ink that's marked with a T for transparent or translucent, but seems to have reasonably strong coverage. I needed to be pretty careful to preserve some of those dark patches. The overall effect is okay, but doesn't quite scream salamanders to me. For the Tau Riptide, I used this Naphthol Crimson. Roboed from Life After the Cover Save podcast was showing off this ink technique on a red crisis suit during a hobby hangout, so I decided to make a bigger, redder Tau than Ed's. Some people say that Life After the Cover Save is just a really funny gaming podcast, but you know what? Sometimes the guys at LATCS have some great advice. On the topic of podcasts, if you're into D&D, the 20-Sided Realms is worth checking out. I like to listen to podcasts while I paint, so if I come across something good, I'll try to let you know. Like I said, this whole video is basically the result of the independent characters hyping up these inks, and they were not wrong, these are great. I also painted up 5 of the old 3rd edition Dark Eldar Talos models. I had 5 Talos, and this set of 5 muted colors from Liquitex. These 5 colors are supposed to all look good together, so I gave them a try. The colors in the set are muted gray, which is really more of a purple, muted pink, muted turquoise, muted green, and muted violet. These are all transparent or translucent colors, and they do look pretty decent when they're all together. Like I said earlier, I used both gray and white ink to pre-shade these models. So I didn't end up with any transitions that really pop on these Talos models, but as a whole, I think they still look pretty good. So this simple technique of black, then white, then color gives some pretty nice looks. This was a great excuse to play around with a lot of different colors and have some fun. I decided to keep going with a few of my favorite models and see what some highlighting would do. I picked out 6 fun pieces from around the color wheel and then found some reasonable highlight colors for them. For the highlight colors, I just grabbed an ink that was either more white or more yellow than the base coat. When I had the chance, I tried to stay with inks that were marked as being transparent or translucent in the hopes that those would give a smoother blend from the base coat up to the highlight color. About this time, you're asking yourself, how many inks does Brent have? This many. I present the following rationalizations. Michaels was having a buy one get one half off sale. Sometimes you need to treat yourself. At least I didn't spend my tax refund on more models. Actually, the best rationalization is that these inks are pretty awesome, and this is money well spent. I have no regrets. Don't you judge me, Kat. Moving on to those highlights. For the devilfish, I used that yellow-orange azo and tried to strengthen up those stripes. As you can see, the highlight definitely helps the orange pop. For the immolator, I highlighted the deep violet base coat with magenta. This too seems pretty good. The base coat was just a little too dark for my liking, and this definitely makes the tank more fun. You can tell that I'm still learning because I went too far in a few places and sorta lost the overall cohesion. There's definitely some promise here though. From some angles, this tank is looking pretty nice. For the big red Tau, I went with scarlet to highlight the crimson. Again, the highlight is shifted in the direction of yellow from the base coat color. This pairing seems to work pretty well. I'm going back over the brightest crimson with scarlet, and you can see some pretty fun effects starting to emerge. On the construction equipment, I pulled out lemon yellow and threw some onto the brightest patches of the yellow-orange base coat. I think some areas of this model are really effective at mimicking the reflection of light on metal. I was actually surprised at how much of a difference just a little bit of translucent pale yellow made. Not bad, not bad. On to the Land Raider. I used vivid lime green as the highlight color. This ink is a yellow-green, and if there was any doubt, it has green pigment, green 7, and a yellow pigment, yellow 138. This highlight step really helped the Land Raider. I wasn't ecstatic with the base coat, but after a few highlights, I started to change my mind. This extra spritz of lime green really kicked it up a notch. One of these days, I want to paint some green marines, so I'm gonna keep this in mind. Finally, we have the Tyranid Carnifex. I was actually very pleased with the base coat of fluorescent blue. This might have been my favorite of the batch. But we're gonna hit it with highlight and see if that makes things better or worse. I don't know how to highlight blue with anything other than lighter blue. Shifting the highlight color towards yellow doesn't seem to work with blue the way that it works for other colors. You artists out there should let me know how to highlight blue. Anyway, the only lighter blue that I have is Liquitex Cerulean Blue, and I'm a little hesitant about it because it's marked as opaque. So I went very gently with this stuff. I see a minor improvement in the overall look, but I'm still in the market for a translucent light blue. Okay, so what did we learn here today? Well, first off, I don't have a favorite between these two ink brands, at least not yet. I got some cool results from both Liquitex and Daler Rowney FW. There's such a big difference between how the different pigments act that it's hard to say whether there's any practical difference between the brands. At this point, I think I can recommend either of them. There are some other brands out there as well, which might be worth looking into, but these two seem to be the big ones in America. In my experiments today, I didn't thin the inks at all, so that's something I'll have to try in the future. There are probably some fun, subtle effects to be had with multiple layers of thinned ink. There's a ton of uses for these inks that I didn't cover in this video. I explored highlighting with light colors, but I haven't tried shading with dark colors yet. I haven't tried weathering yet. I haven't tried brush painting yet. All fun things for the future. Another takeaway is that I think this white ink will be my new go-to for pre-shading black primed minis. Even though I didn't thin the inks or add flow improver, I didn't have a single clog in my airbrush all afternoon. Previously, I had done my pre-shading with white airbrush primer, but that seems to clog my airbrush pretty regularly. With this ink, I can take my time and do a really careful job of pre-shading. In these shots, I'm getting a new crop of minis ready to put in the Goobertown Roulette treasure box. There's some really great models in here, and I think I was able to do a pretty clean job of pre-shading them. Oh look, Inquisitor Eisenhorn. Now, today's video was just about playing around and trying a new technique. I view all of these models as just fun little color tests, and I never planned on actually finishing any of them. A lot of the enjoyment in any hobby comes from learning new things, doing stuff you've never done before, and seeing if you can make something cool out of it. I spent all afternoon painting, and I didn't finish a single model, and I'm probably going to end up repainting all of these, but I had a blast. I learned about a new art supply. I practiced some new techniques. I built a little muscle memory with my airbrush, and I worked with a whole rainbow of really excellent colors. Never feel like you have to finish a project for it to be worthwhile. I like to balance my hobby time between getting stuff done on the one hand and just tooling around on the other. building skills, finding inspiration, and having a great time. I wasn't planning on taking any of these models and finishing them off, but I did block in an extra color or two on a few models, just to get an idea of where our finished product might be headed. There are some real possibilities here. I didn't set out looking for anything in particular today, but I think I may have stumbled into some ideas for future paint jobs. You'll just have to stay tuned. I hope that this has been useful for you. Like I said, I'm just learning, but I did get some nice in-focus shots of my experiences with these inks, so hopefully you can glean something from my successes and my failures here. If you have questions, I'll do my best to answer what I can, and if you have some suggestions, I'd love to hear them. I'm always looking to get better, and I love getting tips on how I can improve. Well, I still have a lot to learn about these inks, but I am really happy with how some of these models came out. It's just such a pleasure to work with so many bright colors in an afternoon, and I'm really glad that you could join me for it. If you like this video, please do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment, and come back again soon. Okay, that does it for this time. Thanks for tuning in.